Old World, Florida.
Old World, Florida.
Old World, Florida. Dude, I'm telling you, dude. Dr. Narco Longo came on and dropped the hammer of the god.
America's mother, daughter of Atlantis. God sent the weatherland. The devil sent the Spanish. Florida is Eden, the phantom of youth. Kali is deception. So Florida is the truth.
Welcome to Florida, baby.
Dr. Narco Longo.
Florida, it is everything. There's too much truth bomb being dropped. I can't digest it all.
Old World, Florida.
Please welcome Dr. Narco Longo.
Definitely. That's how we do it, y'all. So welcome everyone tonight. I'm joined by my co-host and wonderful plow cow, as I like to call him. The beast of burden, basically Juan Ayala from the One-on-One podcast. And our guest tonight is Mario from Symbolic Studies. Okay. Now he's got a great page, a great channel, right? And I think a lot of you definitely were super pumped for this episode. So we're going to get into one of my favorite topics, but we're definitely going to talk about a lot more than that. Florida and the Fleur-de-lis. Now, I made that connection independently, and I certainly don't claim to be the first one. I mean, who can't notice the Florida and the Fleur-de-lis? I know Mind Unveiled touched on that a little bit in his Pensacola video. But yeah, it's something that I've talked a little bit about, and I'm ready to go deep on. So, Mario, thank you for joining us, man.
You're muted.
I think you're muted.
There you go.
My
Classic
internet's
Longo.
so slow, even when I unmute it, it takes a second for it to unmute. So that's the reason why. I'm on a ghetto DSL connection over here. But anyways, thanks for having me, man. Been looking forward to talking to you for a little while now. And I know you've been posting stuff about the Fleur-de-lis. And I have a perspective on it that I think complements your work very, very nicely. And just in general, too, a lot of your stuff relating to Florida, it's really got my mind thinking about a lot of things. But I think a lot of my research overlaps with some of what you're putting out there. And so we're going to definitely get into the Fleur-de-lis, and then hopefully, if we have enough time, get into all the Florida stuff as well, kind of piggybacking off of some of your recent conversations and everything. So yeah, man, I'm pumped to get into it.
Sure. And Juan, well, to start off, thank you for joining us. It's a great
It's my pleasure
to have you.
always.
But here, Juan, here we go. Never mind, I have permission. Okay. Here is his channel. Go check him out, Symbolic Studies. His Instagram is also phenomenal. He is a master of, symbolism and shapes. I love when I knew I had to have you on when I saw the Pisces symbol within the owl's face.
Oh, yeah.
You posted that one time. I love stuff like that. The symbolic correlations to astrotheology, mythology, totemic animals. I love that stuff. So go give him a like, subscribe, notification bell, whatever the fuck. But all right, man.
Awesome.
Let's get into it.
Pull up
For
the
sure.
presentation there.
For sure. You want to just get raw dogging it right in?
Raw dogging, bro.
All right.
Let's do it.
We got
Let's do
to.
There's a lot of slides, so might as well. So just to start off with, my basic opinion these days is that a lot of our symbolic language goes back to the pole, the North Pole, and Northern symbolism, which I've been referring to lately as the polar tradition. And so my understanding is that the polar tradition preceded the solar tradition. And there's a conversation to be had regarding the lunar tradition as well. But I do see a switch between polar symbolism and solar symbolism, which is some of what I've gotten into with Juan on his channel and on some of my live streams and everything else. And so the same is true for me with the Fleur-de-lis. So I see a lot of polar symbolism related to it. I see a lot of northern symbolism connected to it. And interestingly enough, there's a huge weave that I found to be very, very interesting with the Fleur-de-lis and how it relates to Virgo and virgin birth symbolism. So that's what we'll be getting into. But there are a lot of different theories about where this symbol came from, right? So I'm not claiming to cover all of them here, but just kind of show you the different threads that I've been pulling at over the last few years.
And real quick, Mario, so, and correct me if I'm wrong, the astrological alignment of Florida is the portal, isn't it, that we were just talking about before the stream? It'd be the two fish, right?
Well, I mean, so to me, there's so much going on, right, with Florida, as Narco's been putting out, regarding Florida as a sacred center location, which implies to me a transition point or a point of ascension, not unlike Mount Meru or a lot of the myths associated with, the Garden of Eden, the sacred center where you can actually go from domain to domain, from realm to realm via what I call the world axis as well, in the axis mundi. And so I see a lot of world axis symbolism baked into a lot of Narco's work with what he's uncovering about Florida, which to me is absolutely fascinating for so many different reasons. And I see that a lot of this old world sort of research, to me, I see a huge correspondence with a lot of the old world research and how it relates to geocentrism, and how geocentrism is a parallel to the polar tradition. And so if you're thinking heliocentrically, you're going to have a symbolic framework that's different than when you're thinking geocentrically. So do you have any thoughts about that, just in general, Narco?
I love the northern symbolism because, of course, I don't want to take this away from you. I know you're going to touch on the fact that the Fleur-de-lis is frequently the north hand on the compass, and I find that with Florida maps, especially of like the colonial period, it's all over. But Virgo, I'm really excited to hear you crack that open, because I have a little bit, one thing that I want to bring to the table whenever it fits in about honey. So that's all I'll say, but honey.
Absolutely.
I think you're going to probably get into bees a little bit, but a special type of honey in Florida. And Virgo, I get into a lot, but the tropical versus a polar tradition. I've been looking for kind of a title to describe this top-down hierarchy. Like at the top of the planet, it seems so many symbols diffuse outward from there, and then get their flavor and a distinct cultural aesthetic in the tropics, as they make it down. That's why I always point to this Finnish, Venetian correlation, and the Fleur-de-lis certainly makes it into there. But,
And I'll add that Narco Longo loves poles and holes, so this is definitely right up his alley. He loves a good hole. So
Nice. Excellent. Well, you can move on to the next slide then. So I just wanted to show a few quick examples. There you go. I love it. I wanted to show a few quick examples of the fleur-de-lis shapes and symbolism icons that look very similar from all over the world. So this is a coin from India. I don't know exactly the period, but it's really, really old. Here you can see what looks like two fleur-de-lis on top of each other.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then you can see what looks probably like a trident there on the left-hand side. And so you can cruise on to the next slide. And then here, this is a Mesopotamian deity. It's a half lion, half man. And you could see up top that there's a fleur-de-lis on top of its helmet. It's really small here. You know, but you get the idea. And this is actually very interesting, too, because there's a relationship between Virgo and Leo. They're right next to each other. And so in many ways, I look at Virgo as the mother of Leo, of the sun. And so I kind of see that as the Virgin Mary and Christ, which we'll be getting into briefly here in a bit. And then this is Mayan pottery. Yeah. And so the museum who has this, they actually label this as a fleur-de-lis as well. And you can see that the shape or the aesthetic or the quality of the illustration, you know, it's a bit exaggerated, but, you know, what do you expect from the Mayans? That's one of the most beautiful things about their work is that there's a very graphic aesthetic to everything. And my understanding, too, is that Mayan artists were given basically the liberty to create their own style. And so there was a framework to work within, but they were kind of encouraged. I actually look at it almost kind of like graffiti or something like that. They were actually encouraged to come up with their own style and develop things in a certain kind of way. So even though it is a bit exaggerated, you guys can see the fleur-de-lis sort of correspondence there, right?
Oh, yeah.
But the shape itself, you know, it's really, really interesting. I kind of look at this symbol as having a lot of esoteric value beyond its perhaps correspondence with a specific flower, because there are so many different interpretations. Some people say it's a bee. I know there's information out there regarding the fact that it could be a frog that has morphed over time. I see sexual symbolism, you know, in the fleur-de-lis. There's the Trinity, all of these different things, right? But there are basically two main branches that most people will talk about with the fleur-de-lis. One is that it's a flower, obviously. That makes tons of sense. And if you want to just go to the next slide, I'll show you the two flowers that are generally associated with it, which would be the lily and the iris. And there are variations of the lily and variations of the iris. If you're just looking at things graphically, it does look more like an iris than not. And there's mythology and symbolism associated with each of these flowers, right? And even I haven't even really put together too much information about the iris in this presentation today, but even the goddess Iris, it's very, very interesting, some of the symbolism that she's associated with. The rainbow being this bridge from the, you know, earthly domain to the heavens, you know, being connected to a lot of Hermetic symbolism as well. She's kind of like a female Hermes sort of thing. And so, and even just the iris too, and how it relates to our eyes as well, I think is very, very interesting. But the two main flowers that people associate with the fleur-de-lis, if you're going to do research on it, are the lily and the iris. So just thought I would put that out there before we get into other stuff. Now, Barbara Walker, I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, Narco, but she's a really great symbologist. She has several books on symbolism, and I find them to be very, very valuable for a lot of different reasons. And when I read this entry on the fleur-de-lis, this kind of set me off with wanting to study more about Virgo symbolism and how it relates to that symbol. And so here she says, the flower originally represented the goddess's power of self-fertilization when Juno used her magic lily to conceive her son Mars without any male assistance. The same lily was inherited by the Virgin Mary as a symbol of her impregnation in turn. And so Juno was a virgin, gave birth to Mars. This flower was the catalyst for her to have a virgin birth. And there are many gods that are born of a virgin. And so I think this symbolism and this whole thread of mythology is absolutely fascinating. Where does this come from? Why has this persisted for many, many ages? You know, and so it seems as though there are multiple myths where a woman, a goddess, a virgin, which virginity means something differently today than what it used to mean. My understanding is that it used to mostly just mean unwed, right? Without a partner, essentially. But why does this persist? Why is this a thing that's constantly being talked about? Personally, I actually think the virgin birth phenomenon, if it's not still something that's possible today, I think it was something that was probably more common than what we even realize. So I think there is a goddess association, but there's also a very real sort of thing going on here. It's called Parthenogenesis, which we'll get into briefly. And there are animals that can give birth without the assistance of a male. But I think there's a lot of stuff going on here, and clearly with Virgo being the virgin, right? So we can, move on. So this is Mary receiving a flower, and it looks like a type of lily, if I'm not mistaken. And she is being given this flower from Gabriel. And so this was the catalyst for her, once again, to have a virgin birth. So if we look at the next slide, this is just a standard zodiac wheel. I've highlighted two different signs, Virgo and Scorpio. The really interesting thing is how they play off of each other in so many different ways. I'm sure, Narco, you know a ton about this already, right? But even if you just look at the simple glyphs of Virgo and Scorpio, you have the M. There's no other glyph in the zodiac that is based on the M besides these two. And the M relates to so many words that are feminine, like mom, mother, matrix, matter, things like that. Maiden, there you go. Perfect, exactly. My understanding too is M is like an internal sort of sound. So kind of like, you're not actually projecting or whatever. Right. And so that's more feminine. It's more receptive. And it's really interesting that Virgo and Scorpio are on opposite sides of Libra, the scales, right? Which represents balance, which is when we enter, fall. And so there's equal parts day and night at the beginning of Libra. One of the things that I've come across over time, I would love to hear your opinion about it, but I've heard 2 or 3 different takes on this whole thing. One take is that Virgo, Libra, and Scorpio were actually one large constellation, and that Libra was somehow introduced, which is very interesting because Libra is an air sign. And, I think of Lady Justice and things like that, and its correspondence in the tarot relating to justice, the justice card, or adjustment. And I think of that sword, the sword that is impartial and is decisive and things like that. And I think of Libra kind of being that sword and splitting perhaps this huge, huge constellation, into 3 different parts with its introduction, right? I've also heard that just Virgo and Libra, or excuse me, perhaps it's actually Scorpio and Libra that were one constellation, and then another one was introduced, or that was split up. So I've heard different takes on the theme, and it's kind of undeniable in a certain way. There are certain sky maps that show Scorpio's claws literally in the pans of Libra, and my understanding is that the scales of Libra are actually referred to in the night sky as the northern and southern claw as well, further connecting it to Scorpio. But when you're dealing with Virgo, you're dealing with the day side of the zodiac still, versus when you enter Libra, you're now dealing with the night side of the zodiac. So in many ways, you're dealing with the sacred feminine, but you're dealing with a light sacred feminine archetypal sort of symbol here with Virgo, purity and these types of things. And then you're dealing with a darker aspect on the night side of the zodiac with Scorpio. And of course, we know Scorpio, relates to a lot of things having to do with death. Scorpio is when the Day of the Dead is. There's different festivals and things like this during the Halloween is one good example. It occurs during Scorpio. So just the relationship between Virgo and Scorpio, I thought was worth highlighting for a few different reasons in certain ways. And pardon my language, but I do think that there is a virgin whore sort of dynamic going on here as well, right?
Can I touch on the three
Please.
symbols, the three signs being mixed in? Well, it's you know, some of that goes pretty far back, and I have three takes on it. Number one, being an astrologer and getting to know people, and this is kind of the more shallow response, but Virgo, Libra are perhaps the most vanilla signs of the zodiac. And because of their place right on the verge of change, this is where we get, Virgo is where we get the word the verge. Because if Libra is the fall, the official first tick of the fall of man. And by the way, Libra is the loose, well, that's my part too. Okay. So Virgo is the verge. And because it is a mutable sign, it lacks definitive characteristics. This is why people will often say Virgos mysterious, mercurial, they're hermitic and hermetic. They like to go, you know, hide in their cave a little bit. Libra, here's my part two to this, is that Libra is the most stigmatized sign of the zodiac. And that's due to religious and religious stigmas. Libra is Lucifer. This is the fallen angel. This is the fall, when the fall of man, because in this sign you have both the tempters of mankind. You have Saturn exalting in Libra, okay? And then you have Lucifer. So Lucifer is where we get Freya, comfort, fertility, right? Lucifer, Luce is the Libra. Li means light, Luce means light. The Libra, the bringer of the light, Lucifer, the fall. I think I made that case. Now then, so that's kind of an iffy sign in terms of Christian historians might want to keep their hands off that one, right? It has a lot of implications if you try and pick apart that symbolism. You might invoke some, you know, heretical ideas. Scorpio, of course, it goes without saying, is this over-sexualized symbol, and it's also, like you said, the virgin and the whore dynamic. Virgo's the virgin, and they probably would have liked to exalt Virgo instead of Libra and instead of Scorpio. And because that's the fall, it was kind of best to just keep people's attention away. That's just my take on it, is the Christian stigma against Libra being Lucifer and then Scorpio being the sign of sex. They kind of just said, let's gloss over those and pick it back up at Sagittarius, which is, you know, higher learning and stuff like that. But that's my take on it, because he's right, Mario's right, is that it's been a tradition for Virgo, Libra, and even sometimes Scorpio to be amalgamated into a single sign. But to say that this is how it originated cannot be the case, because the 12-fold nature of creation cannot be interfered with. So the 12ness of the zodiac has always been there, always will be. That's my take on it.
Excellent. I love it, man. You know, even just looking at the little illustration of Virgo, you know, she's typically holding some sort of branch or wheat or something along those lines, right? Even that kind of looks fleur-de-lis like, you know, right there too, in that just tiny little glyph. So just thought I would point that out. And then if you go on to the next slide, I just wanted to point out as well that Virgo has a relationship with Pisces, you know, and so if you're going to learn astrology, I've gotten a great deal out of really understanding the polarity signs, the opposite signs of each other, you know. And so in so many ways, there's 12 signs, 12 standard signs, but there's 6 pairings. And so that is where my understanding, at least one of the larger theories out there regarding the glyph of Virgo, is that that's actually a little fish right there, right? Symbolizing the relationship with Virgo and Pisces. And I was just listening to you talk about the relationship with Pisces and Florida, which I think is really fascinating for a bunch of different reasons. So I just thought I would highlight that as well, since we're talking Virgo.
That's what I was trying to say at the beginning too, that the Pisces rules over Florida. It was the last state. Isn't it Pisces the last sign? Again, I'm astrology illiterate, so correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it the last sign of the zodiac?
Pisces is the last sign. It's the final the fin
So it's
of
the
fish.
fish's tail, kind of, sort of. I mean, at the end. Okay, yeah.
The tail end, right? Yeah.
The tail end.
Yeah, corresponds with the feet.
I'm learning.
Awesome. So moving on, I have this quote. This is from a book called The Alchemy Key. And regarding the Fleur-de-lis, he says, a further intrigue in the mystery of the French cathedrals is that the Fleur-de-lis astrologically corresponds to the sheaf of wheat in the constellation of Virgo. The constellation of Virgo provides an uncanny celestial map for the terrestrial layout of the great Gothic Notre Dame cathedrals in northern France. And so he's saying that basically these cathedrals were laid out in France to honor Virgo, and that the different cathedrals are the different nodes or stars of Virgo. And I've done some follow-up research on this and have tried to put together my own map that I think makes sense. I'm still left a little unsatisfied, but given the French, reverence for, the Black Madonna and mother symbolism and the dark feminine and things like that, some of it is more covert than not. I think Virgo essentially, even though she's representative of purity and things of this nature, I think she very much is kind of like a substitute symbol for what I refer to as the dark feminine in so many different ways. The Queen of Heaven, and kind of the Queen of Earth symbolically. And that I think in so many ways, they're essentially one and the same. So I thought that was worth kind of pointing out as well, if people want to do more follow-up research with that. But the important thing here is that the Fleur-de-lis corresponds with the sheaf of wheat in the constellation of Virgo. So if we go on to the next slide, we're going to see an illustration of Virgo. And here you can see in her left hand, she has this bundle of wheat. In her right hand, she has a palm branch. And my symbolic interpretation is whenever I look at Virgo and she's holding these different things, I think in so many different ways, she is holding a substitute symbol for what would be her child. So for the Virgin Mary, it would be Christ, right? Jesus was, one of his nicknames was the branch. And here she's holding a branch. And this branch is a palm branch. And the palm tree, obviously, it's a completely loaded sort of thing. Palm trees were viewed as the world tree for a lot of different cultures. And so I think that is fascinating in its own right. But what he's saying is that bundle of wheat, that is symbolic of a fleur-de-lis. Right. And so, Virgo corresponds with the harvest season. It makes a lot of sense right before Libra season that there would be this harvest of wheat and that you would need the scales of balance, to actually weigh out the wheat for commerce, right? So that you can go to market and you can trade and this and that and everything else. That's my understanding is kind of how it plays out seasonally. And so, yeah, it is.
Yeah, and I just want to say Narco Longo is a bundle of sticks, so it all comes full circle. And real quick, because I'm kind of tripping out on this, you're talking about the wheat. It's what we get bread from, and of course, you're talking about kind of sort of what you were mentioning about the virgin birth. And I think was it Joshua the branch? He was talking about how making bread, right? Because the symbolic correspondence with bread and Jesus, right? You eat of the body of Christ and it's a little piece of bread. Well, the process of making bread is kind of sort of like making a little homunculus because you have to constantly keep feeding it and feeding it and feeding it. He sent me this really great breakdown on Telegram when that Mind Unveiled video dropped, and he was really breaking it down, and it was really fascinating because it's kind of like you're creating this organism and you keep feeding it and feeding it and feeding it until it comes and it forms the bread that you're trying to create. So, I mean, again, interesting
absolutely.
connection.
And, wheat, all grains, a generic name for grains, especially in Europe, was for a long time was just corn. And so it was all considered corn. And so that's why you can see if you just Google corn dollies, there's nothing, it's made out of wheat. It's not made out of corn. And so corn has a relationship with horn, like the cornucopia, right?
Comes from the word kernel. So there's kernels of many things, a kern, a corn,
Yeah. There. Yep. That makes tons of sense. Exactly.
So you said
ahead.
there's a connection between corn and wheat.
Yeah, that corn
Whole
used to
grains.
be, whole grains, exactly. Generically, they just used to be called corn across the board, is my understanding.
Interesting. Because I'm just connecting the Timacuan belief that corn was
Yes.
magical to them. Right.
Oh,
The
yeah.
corn-spiracy. The corn was like the only, I guess, plant or whatever that was that they would
Yeah.
use in ceremony and ritual ceremony. So
That's
it's interesting that they picked just the corn, right?
That's the
Right.
Quran too, and Islam initially worshipped the Virgin. Initially, they were the monotheistic religion that exalted the Virgin to the highest degree. Then they were co-opted by, the Saturnian death cult, and they started wearing their hexagrams on top of their heads, just like the other three, major monotheistic religions.
Mm-hmm.
But that makes a lot of sense because I was also going to touch on the Merovingian. Is a little bit of, you could really tweak that. It is a stretch, but the word virgin can be composited out of Merovingian. Does that make sense? Mary, virgin, Merovingian.
Yeah,
It's a
absolutely.
little bit of a twist. It takes a little working. But the fleur-de-lis was the Merovingian symbol as well.
Exactly right. And I didn't even get into that in this presentation, but that's something that could be unpacked. Definitely. There's a lot going on there that I would be really interested to talk about maybe at some point.
I'm gonna throw in a slick dissident. Merovingians, Martha's Vineyard, right? Everyone goes to
Ooh.
Martha's Vineyard. Merovingian. Shout out to Slick Dissident
a good
on that one.
So here, to me, it's very clear, obviously, Virgo, the Virgin Mary, right? Here you even see that she has a crown, and there's the fleur-de-lis on the crown, around the crown. It's not uncommon to see the fleur-de-lis wrapping a crown, right? And here she's holding Christ, her child, the branch, And so I think that essentially lilies and Mary, she was referred to as a lily among thorns. And so the lily connection, like there's a lot of different things going on there. And some people think too that the lily maybe is just like a substitute sort of generic flower as well. And there could have been crossed wires, obviously, with language and stuff. It's always constantly evolving and things like that. So I'm not so personally stuck on the exact flower. I think that's really interesting, but I think I get a lot more out of the fleur-de-lis than just understanding the specific type of flower that it relates to. So mother and child, right? There's a lot of different myths that are basically surrounding the mother and child. The more I do research on symbolism, the more I have an appreciation for the mother and child, and the more I see kind of a cosmological sort of story, actually, of the universe being feminine, relating to chaos and spirit, holding her child, holding her creation, creating without a partner because she had no partner originally, right? And so if you go to the next slide, I just put together a very quick list, of some of these mother-child relationships. So Mary Christ reminds me very much of Sophia and the Demiurge, Isis and Horus, right? Isis sitting on the throne, which is sometimes referred to as the bride's chair, the bridal chair. The bridal chair or the bride's chair and the throne of a queen are symbolically one and the same. So Isis holding Horus. This gets into some of the stuff, Juan, that we were talking about a couple weeks ago, Typhon and Set. As I said earlier, Virgo and Leo, I think, kind of play this role in the zodiac in so many different ways, especially because they're right next to each other. And then if you want to take like a thelemic sort of approach, Knew It and Had It would be kind of the other pairing here that I decided to list.
And the Immaculate Conception concept it goes back way back in time to Mesopotamian religion. So this is not a new concept. It's seen throughout a lot of religions. Now, that's not to bash any certain religion, but just saying it's not a new concept. And I don't know how the fleur-de-lis relates to all the other type of religions, but you're pulling out the symbolism, and it'd be interesting to see how it evolves throughout all of history.
Yeah, definitely. So we can just stay on this slide very quickly, but just wanted to highlight once again, Virgo and Leo being right next to each other, I think is really interesting. I think that you see the relationship in the Strength card, which is the next slide. So depending on the deck, the Strength card is either the 8th card or the 11th card of the Major Arcana. And to me, when you break it down, it really does look like this is an expression or an emanation of Virgo and her child. So in a way, I look at this as, you know, Mary and Christ, Sophia and the Demiurge. The Demiurge symbol is, he's usually seen depicted, you guys know this already, but as a lion-headed serpent or a lion-headed worm. And so the lion and the serpent and the dragon are part of a very, very potent weave that basically suggests that they're in a lot of ways one and the same. And so the Hebrew letter associated with Strength, this card, is Teth, which means serpent. And when you look at the nature of the snake and you look at the nature of the cat, very, very similar. Not all species of either have slit eyes, but some of them do have slit eyes, both felines and serpents. They both have fangs, they both hiss. The way they strike is actually really interesting and kind of similar. And also the tail too. So it's been said that the lion gets its power from its tail, or that cats get their power from their tail, right? And then that's very serpentine-like, right? And so my understanding is that there were a lot of cultures that viewed the dragon, the serpent, and the cat as being very, very, very similar. And so to me, this lines up with Sophia and the Demiurge, right, in a few different ways. But Narco, I'd love to ask you, have you ever considered this, Virgo and Leo, this being the Virgin and her son by chance?
Now, you know, right off the bat, I think most astrologers are going to say, you know, Cancer's the mother. But I always like to talk about Cancer being the nurturer, and it's Cancer ruling canines. Now, Cancer rules dogs, Leo rules cats, and then Virgo, in that order, in that scheme, rules domesticated animals in general. So things like goats and so on, but in the capacity that they serve humanity. Because remember, you highlighted the Pisces Virgo axis. Well, what's the real common thread between those two is service. These are the two signs of service. Why is that? Because Virgo is the Sir of Vice, right? Or the survivor. You could look at that a couple different ways. But then Pisces is the surface, like surfing in the water, right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So they're both the servicers. And you'll find that with Pisces and Virgos. So as for, I have not, to answer your question, Virgo as the mother of the lion, no, but I always look at the relationship between Virgo ruling pets in general, and then that cusp right there being especially important because, you know, cats are my favorite pet. So
Same. Yeah, exactly. I mean, so if you just look at her gown, it's white, implying purity. This card corresponds with Leo, not with Virgo. But I think you could make the case that it's speaking about their relationship. So she's wearing the white, and then she has these flowers, right, that she's decorated with. She has the crown of flowers and everything else. And Leo is ruled by the sun, right? So it's like mother and son. Christ was the Lion of Judah, right? He's gone by many things, but that is one of them. And so to me, I think you can make the case that this is symbolically, you know, what's going on here. Mother and child, the same way Virgo holds the wheat or holds the branch. Here she is holding the lion. She is taming the lion.
Can I ask you, are you familiar with the Crowley Thoth deck?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Why do you think he switched this card to lust, if I'm not mistaken, or vice versa?
Right. That's a good question. I know that there is it's a Kabbalistic tree of life sort of correcting, I would say, which I honestly have read about multiple times throughout the years. And I've never retained exactly like the logic behind it. But I do see a numerological sort of thing going on as well. because the 11 definitely implies a gateway. A lot of people refer to the 11 as like an angel number or something along those lines. And woman is certainly
It is.
right. Yeah, so woman is certainly a gateway as well, clearly. And I think that if there's going to be one card that Crowley and his followers revere the most out of the whole entire deck, it is that card. It's the Lust card. So I've gone to different occult, bookshops and little OTO meetings and things like that. And they will have the Lust card, or they'll have a really big printout of the Lust card, or they will have, a painting that's part of the Lust card or whatever, because obviously it's the Whore of Babylon and everything else. So I could tell you a lot more about the card specifically and the symbolism, more so than the actual reasoning or logic behind the switch. Do you have an opinion about that?
No, but I think people got to know that 11 is the first angel number. It's the first angel number. It's the first repetition number. It's 11, which is Aquarius, which is the angel of the zodiac, which rules the angles, angels, and ankles. That's Aquarius for you. And that's the 11th sign of the zodiac. Opposite Leo, same axis as Leo. But continue, man.
Real
Good stuff.
quick,
Beautiful.
what was the fish that is corresponds with Florida? Is it Cletus or something or other?
Cetus, yeah.
What is that? Is that a whale? Is that a fish? Is that a
It's
monster?
It's a whale that borders on and is somewhat included in the Pisces zodiac constellation. It's not the constellation Pisces, but within the zodiac sign of Pisces, Cetus is spoken in there as well.
Because I've talked to you about this before, Mario. When John D and Edward Kelly were shown God, it was a whale, but it roared like a lion.
Oh,
Which I find interesting because you're bringing it up here, like this correspondences, and also the color on this card. Is it always yellow, or because that's one of the alchemical stages, right? The yellowing stage, right before the magnum opus, the reddening stage. So is that always yellow, or is that just on this particular deck?
generally it is yellow. Yeah. And I think a lot of times too, it's symbolic of the sun, Leo being, ruled by the sun and things like that. But yeah, that's really interesting. The stuff you guys are bringing up, the water connection between Leo is fascinating. There's so much to get into with that, rivers and waterways and things like that, and its relationship with Aquarius. Really, really intriguing stuff. And also, I'll just add on that to a lot of people who follow Crowley, I would say if there was a counterpart to the Lust card, it would be the Star card. And that if there was another card second in line that I tend to see, that they put out there, it's the Star card for so many different reasons. And we'll get to the Star card actually later on in the presentation. And so here we have the Black Madonna. I've always been intrigued with the Black Madonna and just this idea that she would be pure black with her child. To me, this is very much in line with a long tradition of what some people have referred to as the cult of the mother, and my understanding, Longo, is that the sacred feminine was more in favor during the polar tradition and during geocentrism, and then it fell out of favor, or it was suppressed during the solar tradition and during heliocentrism, and that a lot of groups had to be a little bit more covert with their idolization or worship of the dark feminine, essentially. And so this seems to be a thing that has just existed for a very, very, very long time. And so when I see the Black Madonna and her child, I think it's a reference, to the night sky, essentially. I think it's a reference to spirits. I think it's a reference to the mysteries, the feminine, all of these different types of things. And so this Black Madonna motif, this figure, I don't know specifically if it was completely throughout Europe or elsewhere, but definitely there's this reverence there. And you could see that she's actually sitting within a dome that has stars on it as well. And so this gets into some of the symbolism that I'll be getting into, linking the dark feminine or the dark mother with the north. And so the preeminent, most important spot of a dome would be the top of the dome, right? And so to me, this would be the axis point or gateway out of here. This would be the world axis, which I see, the world axis essentially, is the world tree as well. It's the trunk of the world tree. And so she has this prominent position, within the dome. And I don't have it here, but, Nuit or Nut from Egypt, she's always bending over and she has the stars within her body and she is the night sky, but she is also that arc, right? And so there's a lot of arc symbolism that actually gets connected with this primordial mother figure.
And usually at the top of that dome, they have an oculus, right? Where the sun shines through. So you have that sun symbolism as well, right?
Or arguably the pole star.
Yeah, poles and holes. Yeah,
poles and holes. Yeah, so I see the North Star being at the top of the dome, essentially, the way I tend to view things symbolically. So here we're getting into Parthenogenesis, which means virgin, which means virgin creation, and it's fascinating. There's a bunch of insects and reptiles and I believe even birds and stuff like that can procreate without the assistance of a partner. I think this is really, really fascinating. One of the insects, some bees, can do this as well. And so, as you already guessed, we will be talking about bee symbolism because some people think that the fleur-de-lis actually is derived from the bee. And so moving forward, this is from The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. And so, right, yeah, classic. And so this is his little illustration of the bee as it may be morphed to the fleur-de-lis. And so here he says the bee was used as a symbol of royalty by the immortal Charlemagne, and it is probable that the fleur-de-lis or lily of France is merely a conventionalized bee and not a flower. There is an ancient Greek legend to the effect that the 9 muses occasionally assumed the form of bees. And you guys already know, but bee symbolism, whoa. I mean, it's so deep. There's a lot to get into with all of that. But that is kind of like, this is the main image that I think of when I think of this bee to fleur-de-lis transition. But I will say, I don't know if I've heard other people mention this. This to me looks not just like any bee, but it actually looks like a queen bee to me. So if you go to the next slide.
Charlemagne is known as immortal?
Apparently.
That's an interesting connection there.
So you have a worker bee, a drone bee, and then the queen bee. And so to me, I think if there is a specific bee that it's connected to, I think it very well might be the queen bee. And again, Virgo is the queen of heaven. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say queen bee is Cuba.
Ooh. Nice.
Q and the buzz, but yeah.
Yeah, no, man, I'm into it. And so the order from which bees, wasps, and ants come from is the order of Hymenoptera.
Ooh.
Right? The hymen. Okay.
Right. Wow.
And so if you move on, well, just notice the wings real quick, by the way.
And the hornet. Oh my God. You're
There
horny.
you go.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sorry if I
No,
took that.
you're good, dude. Yeah, man, you're solid. So the Hymenoptera, right? So move on to the next slide. So this actually comes from a beekeeper, and I think she just summed it up really, really nicely. I was on this thread, and I came across her blog post, and I just think it's perfect. So Hymenoptera, veil-winged, an order of insects including wasps, sawflies, and honeybees, but particularly connected linguistically to the goddess culture its ties to the honeybees. Hymen is derived from Greek and means membrane or veil. It denotes not only the veil within the virginal maiden, but also the veil draped before in innermost sanctum of the temple of the goddess. It also came to represent the veil between the outer world and the hidden inner world of women's mysteries, both physically and spiritually.
Dude, I love that.
Isn't that great?
You're hitting on some major gravy right here.
Hell yeah.
I want to say mead is made from honey, right? If I'm not mistaken, mead is made from honey. Mead,
Yes.
Virgo is the verge of the zodiac. It's the midway point. It's the medium. This is why it's the sign of medicine. Okay, it's the sign of being meticulous about things, right? All those words are medi, meaning meet, like in the middle of the zodiac, right before the fall, on the verge. But also mead is right back to the word maiden. To be a maiden is to be a virgin, right in the middle of the zodiac, right? Damn it.
Nice.
Bees.
This is great, dude. Yeah, you're
Beyonce's, isn't she a Virgo?
Oh, I don't know. That would make perfect sense though, right?
Yeah.
No, man, I love it. I'm taking down notes. I
Beyonce,
was really
Virgo.
excited to get your feedback about all this. So, the veil, right? When you looked at the wings, the veil winged, right? Even the wings kind of look like veils. Even when I see like a dragonfly now, and I'm really getting a good sort of glimpse, a good visual of the wing, I kind of think of veils now because of all of this stuff. But it reminds me very much of the wedding veil or the bridal veil, where the custom is that the virgin, the unwed, would be veiled until her father, I believe, right, unveils her, right? So literally veil symbolism is totally a thing, and it's very much connected to Virgo. And so the whole idea...
Beyonce is a Virgo, just confirming. Queen
Ooh,
Bee.
well, there you go. Yeah. That makes tons of sense. And so veil symbolism, right? Deep within Virgo, in the veil of darkness, this is the line of mythology that I'm following right now. Deep within Virgo, behind a series of veils, she either found or created her masculine counterpart. And the veil can be used as a similar symbol that relates to gateways and portals and, all of these different types of things as well. And just like we're talking about, the hymen in and of itself is also a veil, right? Mm-hmm. And as
Sorry.
No, please.
Hymen makes me think of hive mind a little bit.
Oh.
Hymen.
Excellent.
Hive mind. But
Yeah. So you brought up Islam. So if you want to move on to the next slide here and its relationship to Virgin, the Great Virgin, the Queen of Heaven, whether whatever your feelings might be about the hijab and the veil, this is Virgo symbolism. So I brought up the Black Madonna, bringing up the veil, the hymen as it relates to Virgo, and here we have the hijab.
And vril.
Yes.
If you're a virility, the veil, to unveil someone is to unvril someone.
Right. Exactly. So, essentially, when it comes to the Fleur-de-lis, what I really see is the sexual symbolism of the symbol. And it's basically, I see the masculine coming out of the generative feminine. I see procreation, I see life coming out of the feminine. And there's several myths that relate woman, the great goddess, this primordial goddess, and suggest that she is split in two. And this idea of a splitting or a spreading, if you will, is heavily tied to this dark mother. And so it reminds me of legs being opened and spread for procreation, to receive, and then also to project, to give, right, to give life. And so to me, I kind of see the phallus coming from the feminine, essentially. And so if you move on to the next slide, you'll see that I'm just highlighting the two sides of the fleur-de-lis, right? And then I'm diminishing, or I lowered the opacity of the center part, the masculine part. And then if you move on to the next slide, you'll see that I just reversed it, essentially. That it's the masculine phallus that is coming out of the feminine, which you can relate to the idea of order ab chaos, so order out of chaos. I've done presentations linking the world axis, the world tree, to order, and that the basic idea is that there are multiple myths that suggest that the primordial universe had all of the elements that it was ever going to have, but it was all mixed together. It was this heap of different elements that needed to be separated, and it wasn't until the world axis actually separated the elements did we actually have space for the elements to play and interact, and all of these different types of things. So the world axis, or the world tree, has always brought about order, and it also, because of its nature, because of its phallic nature, it actually creates space to exist, 3D reality, whatever you want to say. So what I see is the world axis being birthed, essentially.
Peter, thanks for the $100, man. Appreciate that. 108, 9. I noticed, man. I appreciate it.
Did you read the comment? Drone bees
Peter.
do not have a father, but they do have a grandfather. Sound familiar?
Drone bees. I'm not familiar with drone bees. I'm sorry, Peter. But
This would make sense why bees are, again, secret societies like the Freemasons. Bees are sort of alchemical. They take one thing and turn it into honey. Honey being, again, it's healing. You have the legend of the mellified man, which they kind of sort of turn this person into like a philosopher's stone type of thing, right, with the body and all these different things. So I think that's why secret societies take it. And that connection we made with the tree of death, where when you go through it and you're on the other side, it's honeycombed, right, in this sort of way.
He's saying drone bees do not have father, but they have a grandfather. I just looked it up, and it said that drone bees don't have stingers either. So no male appendage. You could see the stinger representing the male appendage, the pointy bit in the center right here.
Right.
That is a good connection. But thanks, Pete.
Pete always coming in clutch.
So to me, when I look at the
What
Fleur-de-lis,
type of sex toy is that?
you'll find them all over India, right? The lingam, or the
shit.
Shiva lingam, right? And so this basically is symbolic of very much the same thing, is that it's a male phallus coming out of the feminine. And it's really fascinating because this male phallus as well is symbolic of the world axis, right? So the world axis is this idea of this connection between the North Pole and the North Star. And this is the point of revolution. This is the point in which the heavens revolve around, the North Star, right? And so the world axis, the penis, the phallus, all of these different things are symbolic of this sacred center, right? And the ultimate sacred center, I would say, it appears to me, exists at the north. And a lot of groups, as you mentioned earlier, had a northern reverence or a northern or polar cosmology. And when they migrated elsewhere, they brought a lot of these ideas with them. And they kind of still, in a lot of ways, they're still being used, but many people don't realize the symbolism that, they're actually sort of surrounded by, on a daily basis. So as I said, in India, you're going to see Shiva lingams all over the place, but essentially it is the masculine coming out of the feminine, which reminds me of the Fleur-de-lis. And so if you go to the next slide, you will see that this is just some image I found online, but Parashiva and Parashakti, this sort of feminine base, and then the masculine phallus coming out of it. And it's not uncommon in parts of the world where they have Shiva lingams to pour yogurt or milk or ghee on top of.
Do they do stuff to it too?
I would not be surprised.
According to the Bach saga, there wasn't coconut milk hitting that thing.
I'm just asking because it reminds me of the statues of Pan where they would do stuff with it, right? Because again, it's an alchemical process, so the bodily fluids are supposed to be a part of that as well. Interesting.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
This is a big one. Narco would love this one.
I visited this one when I was in India. This isn't my photo, but it's absolutely massive. And so these things, like I said, they're all over the place. There's many, many variations of them. But what's fascinating to me is that there's actually a more primitive, simple version of the Shiva lingam. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that the upper portion, the phallic portion, it looks kind of more like an egg, like an elongated sort of egg. So that's one variation that you're going to see. But my understanding actually is that before it had that feminine base, it actually was just the elongated egg in and of itself, which you can still see people using and creating and all this other stuff, which you'll see in the next slide. But these are symbolic of the world axis. That's what the symbolism goes back to. And so when you look into Vedic mythology, there is a central mountain. There are stories relating to the central mountain, creating the nectar of the gods. I'm kind of following this thread right now that a lot of the Amrita sort of myths, the nectar of the god myths, and I would say perhaps maybe there's an overlap with honey as well, literally comes from a central location, which is very much related to the north, essentially. And that this central axis is what generates the nectar of the gods, essentially, which I think is really, really fascinating.
Yeah. In part of the polar repopulation theory that agriculture and domesticated animal have a Arctic origin, or at least after the recent ice age, because most of the northern hemisphere was decimated after God knows what cataclysm came through, that a Arctic peoples, the elves, the whoever was coming out of a Arctic Atlantis, so to speak, with the intent of repeopling the northern hemisphere, they probably would have had to have been storing a lot of bees with them, and bees would have made their job a lot easier in terms of, this is kind of like the Johnny Appleseed myth too, or an earlier version is where after the ice age, in one account of this, that all the northern hemisphere was scraped down to the granite bedrock, and that all plant life had to be quickly planted in the northern hemisphere by agriculturalists who came out of the North Pole thousands of years ago, 10,000 years ago or so. And these are your Viracocha and people like that coming out, clearly northern phenotypes coming out and spreading agriculture. So that's one taking. And they would have had to have had bees on their side in order to restart all these ecosystems across the northern hemisphere.
Interesting. And I love the connection just with what this symbolically means to have bees around and understand their structure, and knowing that the queen bee is as important as she is, and how it relates to some of this goddess symbolism. To me, it definitely blows my mind, but that does make sense. So you can see here with these lingas or lingams that they're polar symbols, essentially. So what I would say is that the world axis, the world tree, and other variant symbols, I would include the tower, I would include the building itself, I would include the obelisk, that you see a phallus going up towards the heavens. And my understanding is that this is just a reference to the world axis, which means that in the center of everything, under this geocentric way of looking at everything, there is both, as you guys already know, a pole and a hole, a phallus and a yoni. So there's a lot of symbolism relating the northern sky to being the throne of God, but I'm picking up more information that there's also a lot of symbolism relating the northern sky to this goddess. So it would make sense that this phallus going up to the northern sky, this world axis, would have its counterpart there. That there's a sexual sort of connotation regarding the north, and it's both heavily masculine and heavily feminine.
What's the card by Crowley where it's the phallus penetrating the hole at the top? You know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's the devil card.
The devil card, right?
Yeah.
Is that sort of like a hint to this? And in this particular picture, what are those? Are those like acorns or something? Or what are this particular thing?
It's stone.
Oh, they're stones. Okay, because
Yeah.
I was looking at them and you're talking about it representing this polar symbolism, and I'm thinking of the Pythagoreans with the beans, right? They wouldn't eat beans because they represent like little fetuses.
I see.
Here's another good one too, with the lingam coming out of representing a North Pole, like a summit at the North Pole or an axis at the North Pole. According to the Bach Saga and this Finnish tradition, all linguistics come out of the North Pole, or at least phonetic language. So lingam, linguistics, right?
Ooh,
It's a male
excellent.
art form, just like you have history, right? That's yeah.
Good job,
Brilliant,
Narco.
dude. It makes perfect sense because if I were to pick one planet, I guess, or one deity that I think opens up, for me it did at least, it opened up the whole rabbit hole of northern symbolism in a way that I could really understand. It's Mercury. It's Mercury, Hermes, Thoth, and its relationship to the phallus. And it being a messenger of the gods, it uses this axis, this world axis. That's how it gets from place to place. It's a bridge. So I mentioned the tower and the building and everything else. When people build these structures that look very phallic in nature, they're trying to build a bridge to the heavens. That's what they're trying to build. They're trying to build a world axis, essentially, and they're creating a sacred center unto themselves by actually just developing this thing. This is what the Tower of Babel story is all about. And I think that this is kind of subconsciously what drives people to want to build really huge buildings.
Well, Babel represents language as well. To Babylon,
Absolutely.
And the lingam stone being linguistics, Babel, language.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
A
Exactly.
central, also that is the Babel myth, is the northern diffusion of language. You have your Arcto-Indo-European Proto-Aryan language coming out of the North Pole, which is Finnish, the most phonetic language on the planet. That's where the word phonetic comes from. And the Phoenicians spread it around to the tropics, where they started calling it Punic. The Punic is actually runic. So yeah, the northern linguistics, huge gravy there, guys. But keep going.
You
The
got it,
aliens
dude.
come from the
I
north.
love that. I was just recently looking at the Tower of Babel story, and you definitely kind of just like wrapped it all up for me. Honestly, that's great. So, when you just look at the lingam, the basic lingam, it looks very much like a standing stone or pillar stone. And as I was saying, the tower, the building, the obelisk, I see all of these things as being inherently very, very similar. So this is a book about the Celtic cross of all things, but this book starts off with, in chapter 1, standing stones or pillar stones. And in it, he says, I highlighted this little section. Regarding the standing stone, they symbolize the axis mundi, or world axis, the pole or link between heaven and earth. The oldest symbol of the world axis is the sacred tree, best known as the tree of life. And so here, when he's talking about the cross, he's saying you can't acknowledge the cross without the standing stone, that the standing stone or the pillar predates the cross, and eventually there was a crossbar that was added to it.
Ooh.
So to me, that's my understanding. And this guy here, I mean, apparently he's an expert at the Celtic cross, with the Celtic cross, and that's what he's saying as well. So to me, that is fascinating. But these are all polar in nature. It's a pole, right?
For sure, man. And, with Mercury, real quick, Mercury being the phallus, people might say, well, isn't Mars the phallus? Isn't Pluto the phallus? Aren't there these more sexual? And that was more the male sexual impulse, the lust, the warlike nature of a man's lust. But Mercury being the co-mingling of fluids, the merging, to merge souls, to merge bodies. Merge goes back to Mercury. All this is why if you're a mermaid, you're half this, half that. To merge, the verge, it's all looping in together here. So he's right. The phallus and, the lingam and the yoni do go back to Mercury, because that is actually the sacral chakra. Mercury dwells in the sacral chakra, which is the sex chakra. But continue.
And real quick, and stop me if you have this later on, but this is giving me Bach Tower vibes right here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Bach Tower.
I just have to say, dude, I really liked your breakdown the other day with hurricane and hurry. I think that's brilliant, because one of the other things that I've picked up with Mercury and its variants is that he's actually related to spin. And I believe one of the conversations right now regarding flat versus round versus hollow versus whatever is that we're talking a lot about what is actually spinning. Is it spinning up there or is it spinning down here? That's how I tend to simplify the whole conversation, in my opinion. And I would say that it's spinning up there. I think the Earth is stationary. I think it's probably the most stable thing that you will ever see, come across in your life. That's why we've been taught the exact opposite in school, in the solar system. So I think there's been a switch where people had an understanding of a polar system. Now we have an understanding of a solar system, and so many different things are kind of thrown off that way. I have a reverence for all of the luminaries as well, including the sun. But there is something very, very intriguing regarding this solar and polar kind of flip. But there are images and statues of a mercurial figure, basically Mercury, on a wheel. And he's actually spinning the wheel with his foot. And so to me, there is a spinning sort of component or dynamic that he tends to be associated with as well. So when you were talking about the hurricane, I was definitely thinking about that for sure. And so I think that the spin as well, what does everything spin around? It spins around the world axis. It spins around the pole star. So all of these things are very much related, I would say.
Thank you, Tune Up, Level Up, $10. Appreciate that. Thank you, Dawn Dassault. It's a badass name. Thank you, Dawn. And spinning above. Did the other one have a comment? No. Okay. Spinning above, we are stationary. No, this flat plane of inertia being projected via simulation. Well, I agree with you, but continue, Mario.
Yeah, totally. So this is Yggdrasil, right? And so the world tree, I love the fact that it, basically combines the idea of a world tree and also this central world mountain, basically, this ascension point, where you can go to other places. And then also there's that rainbow bridge over there on the left-hand side. And so just because of all of the different world axis sort of things we're bringing up, I feel like it's important to bring up, one of the more famous world trees out there.
Oh, yeah, and that's the egg. Sorry to cut you off, but the Yggdrasil is the egg. And what's the lingam look like? A big old egg at the center.
That's right.
The Yggdrasil is the egg. Dragon, Drasil. There's a lot more to be had there. But
100%. You got it, dude. I love it. And our energetic bodies are egg-like as well, and toroidal, right? And so very much all part of the same sort of stuff, in my opinion. But regarding this central location being a bridge, I've been saying this for a while now, that the north really it's a stairway to heaven.
whoa. Sorry to cut you off.
No worries. For slick anything.
Big money comment. Wow. Drasil is lizard backwards. So not only is it dragon, or it's similar to basilisk, it's Drasil is lizard backwards. That's tremendous. Yeah.
You want a room with Slick, bro? I mean, I can put you guys in contact. And
Dude, he might be my dad for all I know, dude.
That makes sense, actually.
I am an IVF baby. So
yeah, homunculus.
Talk about Virgo and all this fertility stuff.
Yeah.
I'm an IVF, which is the V in vitro fertilization, right? In Virgo, vitro. But
Well, to piggyback off of this, I just have to mention the fact that Draco is a northern constellation. And so there are so many things tied to Draco as well that I'm endlessly fascinated by. And so this to me makes sense on that level too.
lizards lay eggs. Great comment.
And so according to the Bach Saga, the soul flies through the air to the North Pole, right? And so relevant for a few different reasons, but we can move on to the next slide. So there's a book I'm slowly reading through called The Celestial Ship of the North. And here she has to say, regarding the North, this is the Garden of Eden, the North Pole itself. The North that was called sacred, the home of the constellation of the Great Bear, the Genetrix, whose 7 stars were the sailors who watched over and ever will watch over the celestial sea. So again, there's a current of information relating this Queen of Heaven, this virgin, this dark feminine kind of goddess, and she being associated with the North. This book gets into that pretty heavily.
I love that, man.
Yeah.
Continue.
Right on. So I was going to say that Ursa Major and Ursa Minor each have 7 stars. So the handle of Ursa Minor is the North Star. But the fact that they both look very similar to each other and each have 7 stars is still very novel to me. It continues to blow my mind. And so here, right, Septentrion, right? This is just a map that I found at a friend's place. And it's signifying the North, Septentrion, it relating to the North. To me, the Septen part, right, it relates to 7, but it relates to the 7 stars of Ursa Major and the 7 stars of Ursa Minor in the northern sky. And so also when you're dealing with Sept, my understanding too, that this goes back to Set as well, and that Set and Sept are very, very similar, which is kind of some of the stuff that Juan and I got into a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, Sept is the 7, so it's the 7th sign, being Libra, where Set or Saturn exalts.
Ooh.
And then this is also the septum piercing. Okay, so this goes back to Venus as well, because the septum piercing is the telling sign of cattle. The septum piercing, which is a servile animal, or an animal in servitude, but it's also a symbol of submittance. Having I got to talk about the septum piercings one day for everyone out there. But
well, that's really interesting you bring that up too, because one of the thoughts behind the symbol for Libra is that it's an ox yoke. So you actually put it on ox so that you connect them to the plow. And so this is symbolic of them being working animals, on the farm and everything else.
Well, Libra is ruled by Venus, which is where you get bovine. It's where you get bovines, which Libra also rules, because it's Saturn, which is constriction, but Venus, which is blooming plants and foliage. So that's why vines are ruled by Libra. And bovine is Taurus, meaning cows. But it's because of the rulership through Venus that those both get their names. Venus,
exactly.
Bovine, Libra rules beauty and models, and that's why if you tell a girl she's fine goes back.
You're
to
fine,
words,
Narco.
yeah. Venus, yeah. Thanks, man.
Yeah, dude. No, you totally got it. That's awesome.
And real quick, I learned last night, because on the topic of, right, it looks like a little bee. The people who work with the bees are called apeists, I believe it's called, like the Apis bull of the Egyptians that they worshipped, and then you have the connection with the bees and the cattle, right? There's the begonia rituals to make bees and homunculus, right? You use the corpse of a cattle, so they have the connection of the bees with the cow, and then we have the sacred cows and all that good stuff, and the Taurus.
Nice.
So
Last thing I'll say, the Justice card usually corresponds with the Hebrew letter that means ox goad, which is the tool that you use to basically, make sure that your cattle are going where they're supposed to be going to. So just to piggyback off of what you're saying as well, that all makes tons of sense to me. But this is the northern sky, right? And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that I've highlighted Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. My understanding is most of the world's population can actually see Ursa Major. And that I think it's 90% of the world can see it. And so it would make sense that this constellation, them both being circumpolar, so they're not dipping below the horizon line, were revered. And these stars have been referred to as imperishable stars and kind of like timeless stars, and that they're always there, especially the North Star, because it never actually moves anywhere. It's stationary night after night after night. So it's reliable. So this actually relates it to the old ones, the ancient ones, these old gods. So almost like the first tier of deities before a lot of the newer gods kind of came around. So that's why I think that these constellations were heavily important to the polar tradition and people who had more of a polar reverence. And then once heliocentrism or the solar tradition came about for whatever reason, these constellations and stars came out of favor, And now most people pay attention, which for good reason. I spent a lot of time myself researching all of this, but they pay attention to the ecliptic, which is the path of the sun, and the constellations around the ecliptic. But there was a point in time where these constellations, I think, were kind of like perhaps some of the preeminent stars that people were following way back in the day.
Mm-hmm. For sure, man. Great comment right here, Mr. Bryce. I think that is the black sun, of course, being undeniably connected and kind of being an exclusively Arctic symbol. The black sun tying
Yes.
into what you're saying with the black goddess and her black sun, right?
Absolutely,
Great
100%.
comment right there.
Yeah. I completely agree. And some of the stuff I've been looking into lately suggests that if we're looking at the sky as a wheel of sorts, that the golden sun, the sun that illuminates the day, would be on the outer side of the wheel, and the black sun would be the hub of the wheel. The black sun would be a stationary sun at the north somewhere. So that's all of the symbolism that I've picked up about the black sun is basically along the lines of what you just mentioned, for sure. So there
Chris
it is.
Cornell, black hole sun.
There you
He's
go.
The
Oh, yeah.
corn. He's the corn man, the spoon man, the Indian archetype spoon man with the corn archetype as well. That's a
Totally.
good
Totally.
one, man. Good comments in here.
So Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, this is kind of like the standard thing that used to be taught, is that if you want to find Polaris, you just look at the end of the vessel portion of Ursa Major, and then you draw a line out, and you're going to see Polaris, the pole star. And my understanding, too, is that this is where we actually get the swastika from. And that the swastika is a
Hang on, the
holistic...
spoon man. Sorry.
Go for it.
Spoon man is the when I said that, I wasn't even correlating it to what I was looking at, which is the dippers.
Mhm.
The big dippers is the spoon man. The spoon's getting rotated around, but yeah.
Excellent. No, you totally got it, dude.
Sound, Garden of Eden. Shout out Chris Cornell.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Dude, good stuff. So my understanding is this is where we get the swastika from. You're looking at the night sky. If you check in once a season, you're going to see that that Ursa Major has made a quarter turn. And so over the course of the year, you're going to imagine or visualize this swastika, this turning swastika. It's really interesting to me that when you look into a lot of symbolism books, modern symbolism books, they're going to associate the swastika with the sun, that it's a sun wheel. I disagree. I think, well, actually, a lot of solar symbolism came from polar symbolism, and there's a lot of overlap between the two as well. But I will say that my understanding, it makes a lot more sense that it's actually referring to Ursa Major's rotation around the pole star, which is sometimes referred to as the nail star or the sky nail, which relates it to a pin, almost like like a pinwheel or something. So really, the world axis essentially is a cosmic axle. It's the world axle as well. And so this, to me, is what the swastika really is all about. And when you look at the people who have revered the swastika, once you get into their symbolism and mythology, you're going to see Arctic origin stories. And I think that is what connects swastika cultures, is this reverence for the North, having come from the North, and also wanting to return back to the North, this sacred center.
Oh, yeah, man. The Swaz is where you get Sweden, the sweet Eden, the southwest, east, north, your swan, the people of the swan go back to this polar center. That's a central thing in the Bach saga. It's the people of the swan, and then the Sven, Sweden, right? All these people who come out of that.
Right. Brilliant. Yeah, so just wanted to show people in case they weren't aware, but if you take a time-lapse photo of the northern sky, this is what you're going to see essentially, is that all of the heavens revolve around this central point, right? And getting into what you already mentioned, but it's really interesting that the Fleur-de-lis marked north on old compasses and compass roses. So this is just one example. There's so many different examples of this. If you move on, you'll see another example of a compass rose with the fleur-de-lis indicating north, you know. And so once I came across this, I was like, is the fleur-de-lis a northern symbol representing the axis mundi? And then also, because it is a Trinity symbol as well, and it looks like an arrow, it's like, well, where would the arrow symbolically be pointing? And to me, it makes sense that it would be pointing towards the north, the point of origin and the point of return. And so the world axis, too, has long been associated, as I said earlier, with order and authority. You know, so to me, symbolically, the world axis within the human body relates to the spine, right? The spine. Within spine, you have pine. So our spines are symbolic of the trunk of our own personal world tree, right? And so it makes a lot of sense that royal people would hold a scepter or a wand as a symbol of authority, right? And so I got into this. I have a presentation called The Magician's Wand, and I connect all of these different ideas together with the Magician's Wand, which corresponds with Mercury, and how the wand literally is just a world axis symbol. It's a phallic symbol. And so here you see the fleur-de-lis obviously on the crown, and then obviously at the end of that scepter there. And then scepter, right? Getting back to septenary, getting back to 7, getting back to world axis symbolism. And so when I was actually doing just gathering images for this presentation, I came across this coat of arms for a town in northern France. And to me, it just kind of says a lot of the things that I wanted to say. And here what you have up top in that banner, the red banner, you have clearly what's a sun, what looks like a sun, clearly what looks like the moon, and then obviously the fleur-de-lis. So to me, what I see personally is I see solar symbolism with the sun, lunar symbolism with the moon, and polar symbolism with the fleur-de-lis. So it's implying, and I've seen this so many different times in alchemical illustrations and Freemasonic tracing boards and things like this, that there's a third thing that is more esoteric that actually goes back to an older tradition, which is the polar tradition, which has everything to do with the North. And so I think that that's what the fleur-de-lis represents here, is the polar tradition and the North. And it seems to me like there is a trinity sort of thing going on here between solar, lunar, and polar. And of all places, too, again, it's in northern France, which I think is really intriguing. So you can go back to the Virgin Mary. So Mary has also been associated with the North Star. So she has been called the guiding star of Christ. And so sometimes she goes by Stella Maris, which means the star of the sea. Well, if you're going to talk about the star of the sea, I can only really think of the main star that it would be, which would be the North Star or the Pole Star. Because with sea navigation, if you knew where north was, you knew how to get home. You knew more than likely where you were going then because of the North Star. So the North Star is the preeminent star with early sea navigation. So here, this is what they're linking the Virgin Mary to the North Star. And so that to me is really, really fascinating. And I think that you're seeing this connection actually kind of be brought in and kind of completed in a way in the star card, which is the next card that I have, or the next slide that I have. So I think that the star card is representing the pole star, the northern star. Notice that in this version, this is the Morgan Greer. It has 7 points. And then notice that there are 7 stars around that central star. So this very much represents to me, Ursa Major, the North Star. I look at her as kind of like the Virgin, right? And so I think that Stella Maris, the Virgin Mary, as she relates to the North Star, I think that you can make the case that she's also very much related to this card and all of the things that this card represents. And I'll say that the Crowley version of this card makes it a point to have a 7-pointed star within its framework, within its artwork. You know, this is very significant within the OTO and the lemma, is you're going to see the 7-pointed star. And I think that it's basically alluding to Northern symbolism, although I don't think most of the participants in those organizations know that. I think that it's so esoteric that I think that they have a different understanding of things, but that's how I kind of perceive it. And there is a relationship, too, by the way, with the 7 stars of Ursa Major and Minor and the 7 traditional planets as well. And there are multiple traditions that actually link them completely together. And so I think that there's something to be said about all of that as well. So when you're looking at the star card, you're looking at the moon, and you're looking at the sun card. These are in order, by the way. The 17th card, the 18th card, and the 19th card of the major arcana. When we look at the sun card, we don't question what sun it's referring to. We know that it's our sun, our local sun. When we look at the moon card, we don't question what moon it's referring to. But for some reason, well, I know why. But for some reason, the star card, people question what star it is. And I would like to put forward that it's actually the North Star. And so it's a very specific star. It's the star that revolves, or that everything revolves around. And this is an interesting comment, too, because there are the 7 stars of the Pleiades, you know, within the Taurus constellation, just to the upper right of Taurus. And there is a lot, that's a whole episode of the correspondences that exist between the 7 stars in the north and the 7 stars that are the Pleiades, the 7 sisters. And so my understanding personally is that I think a lot of people in the polar tradition understood the 7 stars to be at the north. And then I think with heliocentrism and the solar tradition, now I think a lot of those qualities were later transferred over to the Pleiades, because a lot of the symbolism is very similar. This is where our ancestors come from, or this is where we return to upon death,
Aldebaran,
etc. Aldebaran.
with the that's a distinctly Northern European people. You know, trace their lineage. They say, "Oh, we go back to Aldebaran," or that's the patron star of the quote-unquote Aryan peoples. Aldebaran, which means the highest
the Vril
Baron.
society. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I see here. North Star, the moon, the sun. And then, so now, I'm glad we're able to get into all this stuff here. But Florida, and your research with Florida, and my personal interpretation, and all of the things that I've heard you mention, which I by no means have like digested all of your work or anything like that, but what I have watched and picked up, man, dude, it's like little fireworks kind of going off, because you have totally tapped into a current of polar symbolism in Florida. And it makes so much sense with the shape of Florida, the peninsula part of it. I almost just look at Florida now. It's like an axis symbol. It's a world axis symbol. It's a phallus, right? It's all the same thing.
If you take, sorry.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, if you take Florida and mirror it over, so you have 2 Floridas, those are the 2 wings of the Fleur-de-lis. But
ooh, nice. I'm into it. So you mentioned the other day that it looks like the number 7. Which to me, I'm just like, whoa, it does look like the number 7 with the border, right? And so I'm like, wow. So if I say, what do you think about this statement, basically? The people who founded Florida had an intimate understanding of the polar tradition and its symbols.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, starting off with the Huguenots. These runaway French, potentially Islamic or crypto-Jewish French Huguenots. They're Protestant, of course, but you know, what was Protestant at the beginning? What were they arguing? What were they disputing? They were some of the first people to, quote unquote, settle the west coast of Florida up into Pensacola. But yeah, so it's all over initially, 1500s. Yeah.
And what were the Timucuas also worshiping?
Right. Now, Mario, do you know this, that the Timucua natives erected a monolith with the it's a pillar, but a pillar with no top is just a monolith. So it has 3 fleur-de-lis. I think Juan's going to get it up here, I hope.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Oh,
pull it up
nice.
here in a second.
But the Timucua, who were a race of immortal giants, okay, 300 years old, 7.5, 8.5 feet tall, they built this thing for the French, for the Huguenots, in kind of veneration for them.
Excellent. That's really, really interesting.
Here we go. That's
right.
That's the pillar, yeah.
Okay.
So you got the fleur-de-lis here,
3 fleur-de-lis.
which is really interesting.
Nice, nice. If I'm not mistaken, I have a friend who collects rare books. I think he has this book.
These are engravings by Theodore de Bry based on Lemoyne's engravings, which, this was from the first expeditions of here in Florida. So there might be a few books. John Han has written about it, and Milanich as well. So there's a few different authors that have covered about this.
Nice, nice. Interesting. Yeah, one of the things I kind of noticed about the artwork within the book, if it's the same one, is that a lot of these locations, there's a lot of exotic things that they're portraying from around the world. And the artists hadn't been there, so they're taking people's word for it. And so it's really interesting just to see how different peoples are actually portrayed, and just some of their statues and things like that. You can almost kind of tell that they're hearing about it secondhand or third hand or something like that.
Yeah.
But very interesting nonetheless, for sure. But, we were talking about the number 7 in Florida. It seems to me like this may have been a strategic sort of thing, would be to actually create the border so that you're making a number 7, because the number 7 has this northern correspondence. And it's my personal opinion that literally the shape of the number 7 comes from Ursa Major, right? This circumpolar northern constellation. So if you just go on to the next slide, you'll see a very basic just number 7. And then if you move on to the next one, you'll see that the Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, as I was pointing out earlier, it has this relationship with the North Star. And so you can almost kind of see or infer this number 7. And just to repeat it, but there are 7 stars in Ursa Major. And this is very much related to this tool called the ADS tool. And this was used, my understanding is that this was a woodworking tool. And so you can see in the next slide in ancient Egypt, and it looks exactly like a number 7. And there's variations on this tool, this ADS tool, but it looks like a number 7, essentially. And this ADS tool was actually used in the opening of the mouth ritual. And so they would put this tool against a pharaoh's mouth, and everything that I've read about it says that this tool was used as a substitute for Ursa Major, that it was basically emblematic or symbolic of Ursa Major, and symbolic of this opening at the north, this stairway to heaven, which I would say too is very much related to the opening of the Duat. So this is their correspondence for the underworld, right, where you go after death. And so Juan and I, we just did some work on the tunnels of Set and Kenneth Grant and all that kind of stuff. And essentially in his work, he relates this opening to the north as well. And that the main Sephiroth or point in the Tree of Life, which sometimes is or isn't there, is heavily related to the north. And so I'm learning a lot about, basically, I think that once you get to the deepest levels of occultism, this sounds very arrogant, I guess, but I think once you get to the deepest levels of occultism, you're actually going to find geocentric polar symbolism, because that is the tradition that a lot of this stuff came out of.
Yep.
And so if you are, thinking about things and you're trying to read some of this work, and you have a heliocentric solar-based mindset with everything, a solar perspective, you're going to miss out on a lot of important information. And that even some of these occultists that have really done a lot of homework and studying and everything else, I'm coming across several books and several authors that are basically acknowledging this stuff pretty much outright, that northern symbolism in the polar tradition is where a lot of their techniques actually come from, is where a lot of the symbolism comes from, and only serious students it appears to me, really get to that point of realizing that. And also, too, it's really hard for people to have an understanding of how significant or important it is because they're not thinking geocentrically. Once I made the switch and I'm like a geocentrist and it makes way more sense to me than anything else, a lot of this stuff started falling into my lap and a lot of stuff started actually making more sense.
Oh, yeah. For sure, man. And at the center of all kind of occult societies is this either venerated or bastardized fertility worshipped. For fertility worship, where it's either being preserved or it's been flipped on its head and it's been corrupted. But nonetheless, that's what's behind a lot of these occult societies. All those go back to the North too. If you just ask the Bach Saga, all fertility rites had a goal in mind, and that goal was pretty much centered around the North Pole.
Yeah.
So,
exactly. Yeah, you got it. So here you can see Anubis with an adze tool. So this is another variation on the adze tool, but this tool, again, is symbolic of Ursa Major. So there's a northern correspondence here.
sure.
And sometimes, instead of it being an adze tool, it would be the thigh of a bull or the thigh of Set. And so Set was said to reside, there's a couple of different variations, but Set was said to reside behind Ursa Major, behind his mother, or Set has a huge correspondence, I'm realizing and learning, with Sirius, the dog star, as well. And that the dog star is sometimes referred to as the 8th child of the northern goddess. That the 7 stars in the northern sky are her first 7 children, but her 8th child is actually Sirius, the dog star. But sometimes this thigh is called either which way, the thigh of the bull or the thigh of Set. And it's used essentially in, from my understanding, in very much a lot of the same ways. It is a substitute symbol for Ursa Major. And you will see, if you look at the Dendera Zodiac, you will see this severed thigh in the next slide there. So there you can see the Dendera Zodiac, the thigh of the bull in the northern sky. And I'm coming to find out actually that a lot of single-legged, one-legged symbolism goes back to world axis symbolism as well. And so it's not uncommon to see Mercury or Hermes on one leg about to take off. The Magician card in the Crowley deck, which corresponds with Mercury, he's on one foot. So the idea of one person, or the idea of a person balancing on one foot, or even I think like the old Venus statues where it tapers down, you know, and it's like goes to a point. Very, very emblematic of the cosmic axle of which everything in the heavens revolves around. I don't know if you've see, you remember this probably, Bugs Bunny cutting off Florida, or have you talked about this ever?
I've never talked about this.
Oh, really?
Never thought about it until you just.
They wanted to do it for real though, with the canal that they wanted to do through the actual state at the top of it. I mean, they quite literally wanted to do this.
Interesting. Yeah, just that last comment there. So I remember this as a kid. Bugs Bunny, he's sawing off Florida, and then in the next shot, right, Florida's floating away. And so this reminds me very much of, like, I believe it's Osiris, right, who has either 13 or he's dismembered into 13 or 14 parts. And they're all found except for the phallus, right? The golden phallus. So there are, my understanding, more than one myth that's kind of similar, where a deity loses his phallus and that there's a quest actually to regain the phallus.
Oh shit! This is like Osiris, like Florida's America's phallus getting chopped off,
exactly,
thrown into the water like Osiris.
Exactly right.
Nice.
Totally.
And Osiris is Osiris. You know, we were talking about stars a little bit earlier, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly right. So in so many ways, Florida is the phallus. Florida is the world axis. I think that's why it was the perfect spot to have a polar tradition sort of embedded or encoded or whatever you want to say, because I think that they understood this. And so,
sorry.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say the Gulf Stream is, you know, after any type of ice age, whoever's leaving the North Pole would kind of be restricted to going to Florida, because if most of the northern hemisphere is covered with sheets of ice, you only have this warm, intelligent stream of water that has carved out the ice up to the northern lands. According to the Bach saga, this is the only way that the Atlanteans, or the people of the Eden, the Garden of Odin at the center, not the Eden in Florida, which is kind of phase 2. Odin at the center, the Garden of Eden, they left, but they could only go where the Gulf Stream permitted them, which took them right to the land of promise. And yeah, this all makes tons of sense.
Fascinating. So just on this peninsula tip, just moving on to the next slide, you were making the case, I'm sure you've mentioned it multiple times, but peninsula relating to the pen and pin. And again, the North Star, the North Pole, the world axis, the cosmic axis is the pin in which the heavens revolve around. So to me, that makes a lot of sense. And then you can just cruise by this image because we've already seen it. But again, the pin. And then to piggyback off of what you were talking about the other day, but the city of Miami and its flag. And to me, I'm just like world axis symbolism, world tree symbolism, the palm.
They call it World City and Magic City. World City or Magic City.
Wow. See, I mean, that's so perfect. Magic, Mercury, that makes a ton of sense. And so the palm too, as I'm sure you already know, but there's a lot of interesting correspondences with the palm tree and also the hermit card, which is ruled by Virgo. And so he's holding a lamp, which is an anagram for palm. And then literally the Hebrew letter that associates with the hermit is Yod, which means hand, which means, obviously you can infer the palm, obviously with the hand. And so there's a lot of different things kind of going on there as well. And then the hermit too, he always has his staff.
And he has his lamp, which is an anagram for palm, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Were you going to say that? Sorry.
Oh, no. I think I said it, but you got it, man. That's it. It's still, all of this stuff just still blows my mind just because I love it so much. But I love the fact that you guys talked about the similar colors of the Indian flag. And what do you have on the Indian flag? You have a wheel like the cosmic wheel. So what would the wheel revolve around? The cosmic axis, the world axis, the pole star, the nail star, the sky nail, the point of pivot. And so to me, when I see the two flags, personally, I see a lot of overlapping polar symbolism between the two, between the world tree and between the wheel. Very, very similar sort of ideas, I would say. And then, of course, you've covered this, the Bach Tower gardens, right? And I just see, whenever I see a tower, I think of the Tower of Babel, this connection between heaven and earth, and I think that this would be no different. And it's symbolically encoding or representing paradise or Eden, the point of origin, etc. And obviously the artwork on that door there, which I would love to see in person at some point, implies some of these themes.
Can I pull up a picture 1 sec?
Absolutely.
Just to show it was not common. It was common to use the Fleur-de-lis as the northern hand on the compass for a large period of time, but in the 20s, that was kind of unusual. Well, here we have the book that Edward Bach printed himself, and we have, what do we have? The Fleur-de-lis on the north hand of the compass. And then you have kind of a Christian cross, Celtic cross, Jesuit cross, depends which way you want to look at it, right there on the, what would that be, eastern hand. Yeah, Neptune, Jupiter. Bach Tower is the only, feature. What's the only tree on this place? The palm tree. And it's sticking out of where? It's sticking out of a very specific spot. Bach Tower is where Bach Tower is, but where's the tree? With the fountain or the perhaps, whatever this foliage is down here. or spouts of a fountain. That's sticking right out of Tarpon Springs.
Mm.
But yeah, Bok
Nice.
Tower. That's from
Very
from the Bok Tower book.
Gotcha. That's awesome. So there's only a few more slides here, but I just wanted to point out, the Tree of Life. And the Tree of Life, and just kind of some of the similarities I'm seeing with the Fleur-de-lis. And the Tree of Life is broken down with 3 pillars. The 2 pillars on the left and the right are the ones that get the most play and are most understood. You're going to see these twin pillars all over the place, but the twin pillars, whenever you see 2 pillars, there's an implied 3rd pillar, there's an implied gateway or portal or whatever you want to say. There's a middle way or there's a middle path. And this middle way or middle path, to me, very much lines up with polar symbolism. And so this central pillar is the true point of ascent. It goes above the other 2 pillars, and it goes below the other 2 pillars. And the hidden Sephiroth, the hidden point that gives you access to the underworld via the tunnels of Set, sort of way of looking at the reverse or inverted Tree of Life, the Tree of Death, the Klipothic Tree. The hidden Sephiroth that gives you access to the other side of things, Universe B, if you want to call it that, or the underworld or the Duat, is on this central pillar as well and corresponds with the north. So it just reminds me of the Fleur-de-lis and the fact that the central sort of phallic nature of it is what goes above and what goes below the other 2, the leaves or the petals or whatever you want to say. So there's a Kabbalistic sort of way of looking at this as well. You can move on. And it looks like I have...
Mark, thanks for the $7. Shout out Siesta Key Meetup. I'll see you there, man. Appreciate it.
Hell yeah. So just highlighting exactly what I just said. But I think I repeated... There you go. I just wanted to point out as well, dude, the fact that when you remove this central sort of phallic nature of things, does it not kind of remind you a little bit of the Pisces symbol or the Pisces glyph? You generally have this band that connects everything together. And this is one of the things that you will find within Pisces is you will see the 2 lines connected with a horizontal line. And oftentimes when you look at sky maps, you will see that Pisces, the fish are actually connected with some sort of cord, usually from mouth to mouth or around the tail. Because when you look at Pisces in the night sky, it's like a big V. And so it's the 2 fish coming from a central spring, essentially. So they're always connected in some way. But when I was putting this together, I couldn't help but think about the 2 side petals and then that connecting band, which you usually see. I couldn't help but think of the Pisces glyph.
That's a great connection because that's a bullseye Pisces correlation to Florida. I agree with you 1,000%. I also potentially see 2 crescents, two courgettes, so to speak.
Ah, right. Yeah, exactly. I see that too. And so moving on here to the final few slides, Buddha, meditating in front of the world tree, right? And so let's just read this next quote here. Because its roots delve into the soil and its branches stretch up to the skies, the tree is universally regarded as a symbol of the relationships established between heaven and earth. In this sense, trees possess the character of centers to the degree that the world tree is synonymous with the world axis, right? And so just to drive this point home with the Fleur-de-lis, the world tree, the northern stuff, I came across this little relief statue thing of Buddha meditating, but instead of a world tree, what do you see?
Wow.
You see the Fleur-de-lis, right?
That's
and
tremendous.
So, yeah, I thought so too when I came across it. And so that's pretty much it, dude. And so just kind of trying to come around full circle with everything of my main points with the Fleur-de-lis, Florida, all that kind of stuff.
Dude, it was
Excellent.
home run after home run. I just want to, we'll definitely converse a little bit more, but I want to piggyback right here with, while we're hot on this subject is the Mormons. I was seeing a lot of great comments saying Mormon this, Mormon that. Okay. Florida, the Fleur-de-lis, honey, virginity. Okay, giants. How does it all tie in, right? Here we have a site. So for those who don't know, the Mormons not only entertain ideas of an old world habitation, an Old Testament, context to the Americas, but they also point to a pre-Columbian rehabitation of North America by certain, I don't know if you'd call them biblical groups, but certain religious groups like the Nephites. Okay. Now here in Lehi, right? So Lehi, returning to a holy land, returning to the land of promise after the flood. According to the Mormons, this happened in the exact vicinity of Apalachicola River, which is where allegedly they re-entered the United States through the Apalachicola River, which is the precise region that E. Calloway, Florida's 1936 Republican candidate for governor, basically asserted to be the true Garden of Eden. So this is just another huge correlation to this area. But this is the specific thing I wanted to bring up, is they point to a specific type of honey that's unique to the Southeast United States. This is called tupelo honey or tupelo honey, right? Now this is considered a type of a biblical honey because this tree, the tupelo, it's like a swampy cypress type tree, is found on both sides of the Atlantic, mysteriously. And here I'll just want to gloss over some of this. Archaeology, bees, climate, latitude, wind currents, promised land, aka the USA, abundance of food, and, quote, it just makes sense. Why Apalachicola, Florida is plausible for the land of Lehi's Landing, 591 BC, 1st Nephi, chapter 18, verses 23 to 25. Okay. Thesis, the Mulekites, and remember, when Spain invaded Florida, they said that the Amalekites were there. The Amalekites. So here you have the Mormons claiming Mulekites. 589 BC may have landed at the Gulf of Mexico by the Mississippi River and continued up, blah, blah, blah. So this, we're about to wrap up here, but basically all the way at the bottom, they mention, go over mounds, they go over a lot of different aspects to this, but tupelo honey is produced from the tupelo gum tree, which grows profusely along the Chipola and Apalachicola rivers of northwest Florida. Here in the river swamps, this honey is produced in a unique fashion. Bees are placed on elevated platforms along the river's edge, and they fan out through the surrounding tupelo blossom-laden swamps during April and May, and return with their precious treasure. This river valley is the only place in the world where tupelo honey is produced commercially. Real tupelo honey is a light golden amber color with a greenish cast. The flavor is delicious, delicate, distinctive, blah, blah, blah. Good white tupelo honey. This is where it's alchemically, symbolic. Good white tupelo honey, unmixed with other honeys, will not granulate due to its high fructose, low glucose, blah, blah, blah. It's good for diabetics too. Tupelo honey bloom. So there's a black tupelo. There's different things that, if mixed with it, will reduce the purity. So it's the white tupelo, which is this like sacred honey where the honey has special qualities. Blah, blah, blah. It goes through tupelo honey. But why do they connect to well, that's the end of the thing. Wish I had more on that, but the Mormons point to the bees, this certain type of honey, as potentially showing a cross-Atlantic, restarting of certain ecosystems. And it's the exact area that E. Calloway was honing in on and moved to and declared the Garden of Eden. But bees Huguenots. This is the same exact area where the Huguenots went up into and landed, just about. So.
Got it. And then isn't the beehive on the Utah flag, if I'm not mistaken?
Is it?
I think so, yeah.
Yes, it looks like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly is.
Nice. So there you go.
For sure, right there in the middle. But
yeah, exactly.
Right there. Yeah, that's a good one. Utah, for those who don't know, the Mormon state, Judah, ancient Judah, the land of Judah.
Right. Well, I know you got another stream. Dude, thank you so much for your time. I just have to say, too, real quick, when I do check out your work, I always leave inspired. And so just keep on doing your thing. I'll be paying attention and all of that. Just really appreciate what you're up to these days.
I really appreciate that, man. You're a good supporter to have, and I can tell you I admire your work as well. Symbolism is top notch. So guys, go check him out. I'm sorry to have to wrap this one up quick, but we're going to be doing more with Mario. That's for sure. Go join the SS over at his channel, the Symbolic Studies. And Juan, thank you to you too. We're going to sign off here, but thanks everybody.
All right, guys, take care.